I never thought a gravel path would destroy my relationship with an entire neighborhood. But that's exactly what happened when Sharon Sutherland decided those tire tracks were her personal vendetta. My name is Samuel Stanton, and I've been living in the Riverside Hills community in Boulder, Colorado for the past 8 years. It's one of those planned neighborhoods where everything looks perfect from the outside: manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, and a shared clubhouse that hosts everything from yoga classes to book clubs. I run a small landscaping and construction supply business, and when I moved here, I negotiated something that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time. I would donate materials and labor for community projects, and in return, I could use the shared maintenance path that runs behind the properties to transport supplies to the clubhouse when needed. For 7 years, this arrangement worked flawlessly. I delivered mulch for the community gardens, hauled timber for the pergola project, brought in stones for the walking paths, and nobody said a word. The path was designed for maintenance vehicles anyway, wide enough for a truck, reinforced with gravel and drainage. The HOA president at the time, a reasonable guy named Marcus Chen, had actually thanked me multiple times for saving the community thousands of dollars. Then Sharon Sutherland took over. She was 52, blonde hair always pulled back so tight it looked painful, and she wore designer athleisure like it was business formal. She'd been on the HOA board for 3 years, mostly keeping quiet and voting with whatever Marcus suggested. But the moment Marcus moved to Denver for work, Sharon launched her campaign to become president like she was running for Senate. She knocked on every door, brought homemade cookies that probably cost $40 from that boutique bakery downtown, and promised to restore the community to its full potential, whatever that meant. The first time I met Sharon as HOA president was on a Tuesday morning in March. I was loading bags of topsoil into my truck, preparing to deliver them to the clubhouse for the spring planting event. My phone rang and I didn't recognize the number. "Is this Samuel Stanton?" The voice was sharp, clipped, speaking. "This is Sharon Sutherland, president of the Riverside Hills HOA. I need to speak with you about your flagrant violation of community property guidelines." I set down the bag I was holding. "I'm sorry, what violation?" "The tire tracks on the shared maintenance path. I've documented them extensively. They're unsightly, they're damaging the gravel, and they're creating an eyesore for residents whose properties border the path." I walked over to my truck and leaned against it, trying to process this. "Sharon, I've been using that path for 7 years to deliver supplies to the clubhouse. It's part of the arrangement I have with the HOA. Had," she corrected. "Had with the previous administration. I've reviewed all existing agreements, and I found yours to be woefully inadequate and improperly documented. There's nothing in writing that gives you permission to drive commercial vehicles on community property." My jaw tightened. Marcus and I shook hands on it. "I've saved this community tens of thousands of dollars in materials and labor. Mr. Stanton, a handshake isn't a legal agreement, and regardless, the damage you're causing exceeds any value you may have provided. I'm formally notifying you that you are no longer permitted to drive on the shared path. Any future violations will result in fines as outlined in our community guidelines." How am I supposed to deliver supplies to the clubhouse then? "You want me to carry 50-pound bags through someone's front yard? That's not my concern. Perhaps you should consider whether continuing this arrangement is feasible given the new restrictions. Good day, Mr. Stanton." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there in my driveway, phone still pressed to my ear, trying to understand what just happened. The spring planting event was in 4 days. I had promised to deliver enough topsoil, mulch, and garden supplies for 30 raised beds. The clubhouse was at the far end of the development, accessible by a winding residential road with no parking, or by the maintenance path that ran directly behind the properties. I called my neighbor, Pete Rodriguez. He'd been in the community even longer than me and had always been involved in HOA matters. "Pete, did you know Sharon was planning to ban me from the maintenance path?" he sighed. "I heard rumors. She brought it up at the last board meeting. Said something about preserving property values and maintaining aesthetic standards. I tried to argue that your contributions outweigh some tire marks in gravel, but she had photos, Sam. Like, dozens of photos from different angles, different times of day. She made it seem like you were tearing up the path with monster trucks. It's gravel. It's meant to be driven on." "I know, man, but she's on a power trip. Between you and me, half the board is terrified of her. She spent 3 hours at the last meeting talking about violations and fines. She's already sent warning letters to the Johnsons about their mailbox being half an inch off center." "Half an inch?" She brought a measuring tape to the meeting. I rubbed my eyes, feeling a headache forming. "What do I do about the spring planting event?" "I don't know." "Can you hand cart the supplies in, Pete? We're talking about 2 tons of materials. It would take me days, and I'd have to walk through people's yards. Then I guess the spring planting event might not happen." That's when I realized something. If Sharon wanted to play this game, I could play too. She'd technically freed me from my obligation. No path access meant no supply deliveries. No supply deliveries meant no donated materials or labor. Simple as that. I called Sharon back. She answered on the first ring. "Mr. Stanton, I believe I was clear." "You were crystal clear, Sharon. I'm calling to inform you that since I can no longer access the maintenance path, I'll be unable to deliver the supplies for the spring planting event this Saturday. Additionally, I'm withdrawing my donation of materials and labor for all future community projects." Silence. "Excuse me. You heard me. My arrangement with the HOA was dependent on path access. No access means no arrangement. I'm sure you can find another supplier who'll donate a couple $1,000s worth of materials and labor. Shouldn't be too hard. Mr. Stanton, we have an event planned. People are expecting." "Then you should have thought about that before banning me from the path." "Good luck with the event, Sharon." I hung up and immediately felt both satisfied and anxious. I just pulled the plug on a community event that people were genuinely excited about. But what choice did I have? I couldn't physically deliver the materials without the path, and I certainly wasn't going to donate supplies and then pay to have them professionally delivered. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing. First it was Sharon again. I declined the call. Then board member Jennifer Moss. Declined. Then Pete. I answered Pete's call. "Dude, Sharon is losing her mind. She's calling an emergency board meeting for tonight. That's her problem." "Sam, come on. A lot of people were looking forward to this event. Kids were going to plant gardens with their families." "Pete, I can't deliver 2 tons of materials without using the path. Physics doesn't care about Sharon's aesthetic standards. If she wants the event to happen, she can give me a 1-day exemption to use the path. I'll suggest it at the meeting." The emergency board meeting happened without me. I wasn't invited, which was fine. I spent the evening doing paperwork for actual paying customers. Around 9, Pete called. She rejected the exemption idea. Of course she did. She's convinced you're trying to manipulate the board. She spent an hour talking about not giving in to bullies and maintaining standards. The vote was 4-2 against granting you any access. Who voted for it? Me and Robert Kim. Everyone else is either scared of Sharon or agrees with her. So what's happening with the event? Sharon says she'll handle it. She's confident she can secure alternative arrangements. I almost laughed. Good luck to her. Thursday morning, I was working in my garage when Sharon's silver BMW pulled into my driveway. She got out wearing yoga pants and a fitted jacket, her face already set in what I was starting to recognize as her signature expression of barely contained irritation. "Mr. Stanton, we need to discuss this situation like adults." I set down the rake I was repairing. "I'm listening." "Your refusal to deliver the promised supplies is putting the entire community in a difficult position. I've made calls to 3 landscape supply companies, and the quotes are astronomical. We're talking about $4,000 for materials alone, not including delivery." "Sounds about right." "That's what I've been donating. So you understand the position you're putting us in." "Sharon, I'm not putting you in any position. You banned me from the path. I can't deliver supplies without the path. Therefore, no supplies. It's simple logic." She crossed her arms. "This is clearly retaliation for my enforcement of community guidelines. Call it whatever you want. The fact remains that I physically cannot deliver materials if I can't access the delivery route. You could park on the street and hand cart them in. 2 tons of materials. That would take me 3 full days of labor. Days I could spend working for actual paying customers. Why would I do that? Because you made a commitment to this community. A commitment that was contingent on path access, which you revoked. Look, Sharon, I don't have any hard feelings. You want to run the HOA your way, that's fine. But my donation agreement is void. If the community wants my materials and labor, we can draw up a new contract that accounts for the new restrictions." "What kind of contract?" "Standard delivery would be an additional $300 per load to cover the extra labor time. Materials would be at cost, no markup, which is still generous. And I'd need payment up front." Her face flushed. "That's extortion. That's business. I'm actually giving you a huge discount. Any other supplier would charge you full retail plus delivery fees. I'm offering materials at cost and below market delivery rates. The HOA budget doesn't have room for these expenses. Then, I suggest, you either adjust the budget or reinstate my path access. Those are your options." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her jaw working like she was chewing through possible responses. Finally, she spoke. "The board will not be extorted. If you're unwilling to fulfill your commitments without making unreasonable demands, then we'll make do without you. The spring planting event will proceed as scheduled. With what supplies? That's no longer your concern." She turned and walked back to her BMW, heels clicking on my driveway. As she drove away, I wondered how exactly she planned to pull off a major gardening event with no supplies and no time to procure them. Saturday morning, I found out. I was having coffee on my back deck when I heard the commotion. Voices, a lot of them, coming from the direction of the clubhouse. Curious, I walked through my backyard to where I could see the clubhouse area. There were about 40 people there, families with kids, all gathered around 30 empty raised bed frames. Sharon stood on the clubhouse steps with a microphone, and even from a distance, I could hear the tension in her voice. "I want to thank everyone for coming out today. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control, we've had to make some adjustments to today's event." Murmurs from the crowd. "Our previous supplier proved unreliable, but I've arranged for supplies to be delivered next Saturday instead. Today will be more of a planning session. We'll assign beds to families, discuss what you'd like to plant, and prepare for next week's actual planting day." A man I recognized as Tom Wheeler called out, "Sharon, the kids brought their gardening gloves. They were really excited to plant today." "And they will plant. Next week. I apologize for the inconvenience, but sometimes these logistical issues arise. A woman from the crowd said something I couldn't quite hear. Sharon's response was clipped. As I said, the previous supplier was unreliable. We're working with a professional company now who will deliver next Saturday. I turned and walked back to my house. The event wasn't my problem anymore. Later that afternoon, Pete came by. You hear about the disaster at the clubhouse. I saw a bit of it. Sharon's blaming you. She's telling everyone you backed out last minute without warning. I felt my blood pressure rise. That's a lie. I told her on Tuesday I couldn't deliver. I know that. The board knows that. But she's spinning it to the general community like you're the bad guy. She sent out an email this afternoon titled Community Update, Vendor Reliability Issues. Let me see it. Pete pulled up the email on his phone. I read it, my anger building with each word. Sharon had written 3 paragraphs implying that I had promised to deliver materials, then backed out without notice, forcing the HOA to scramble for alternatives. She never mentioned banning me from the path. She never mentioned that our arrangement was being terminated. She made it sound like I was just being difficult. This is defamation. Probably. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to send out my own email to the community listserv explaining exactly what happened. Sharon controls the listserv. She won't let it through. Then I'll print flyers and put them in everyone's mailbox. Pete looked uncomfortable. Man, do you really want to escalate this into a neighborhood war? She started it. I'm just defending myself. That evening, I wrote a clear, factual account of events. I explained the 7-year arrangement I'd had with the HOA, Marcus's approval, my donations of materials and labor, and Sharon's decision to ban me from the maintenance path. I included the dates of our phone calls and explained that I had given her 4 days' notice that I couldn't deliver the supplies. I ended with a simple statement. I remained willing to continue supporting community projects if path access was restored, or if we could negotiate alternative arrangements. I printed 200 copies and spent Sunday morning walking the neighborhood, putting a flyer in every mailbox. It took 3 hours, but by noon, every household had the full story. Monday morning, I got a certified letter from Sharon. It was a formal cease and desist, demanding I stop spreading false information about the HOA and its leadership. It threatened legal action if I continued to defame the board. It also included a fine notice, $250 for placing unauthorized materials in community mailboxes. I called my lawyer, David Klein, who I'd used when setting up my business. David, I need advice on an HOA situation. I explained everything, sent him copies of Sharon's email and my flyer, and forwarded him the cease and desist letter. He called me back 2 hours later. Sam, the good news is her cease and desist is toothless. Everything in your flyer is factually accurate, and truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. She can't sue you for telling the truth. And the bad news, the mailbox fine might be legitimate. HOA guidelines often prohibit unsolicited materials in mailboxes. It's a stretch, but she could potentially enforce it. It's worth $250 to get the truth out. That's your call. But Sam, I need to be honest with you. HOA disputes can get ugly and expensive. If Sharon wants to make your life difficult, she has a lot of tools at her disposal. Fines, violation notices, even putting a lien on your property if fines go unpaid. Can she do that? If it's in your CC and Articus and properly enforced, yes. I'd recommend requesting a copy of all HOA governing documents and having me review them. We need to know exactly what powers she has and what your rights are. Send the request. Already drafted. I'll messenger it to the HOA today. Wednesday, the fallout from my flyer became apparent. I started getting calls and visits from neighbors. Most were supportive, saying they had no idea Sharon had banned me from the path and that it seemed unreasonable. A few were upset with me for causing drama. One couple, the Hendersons, actually yelled at me in my driveway about disrupting community harmony. The most interesting visit came from Robert Kim, one of the board members who'd voted in my favor. "Sam, I need to talk to you about something serious." We sat on my back deck with beers. "Sharon's planning something big." She called a closed board session for Thursday night. Agenda is listed as member compliance issues, but she specifically asked that you not be notified. Can she do that? Technically, if it's about potential rule violations, she can hold a preliminary discussion without the accused member present, but a final decision requires notice and a hearing. What's she planning? I don't know for sure, but she's been talking about pattern of behavior violations. Unauthorized use of property, distribution of inflammatory materials, refusal to comply with board directives. I think she's building a case to fine you heavily and possibly pursue legal action to force compliance. Compliance with what? Whatever she decides. Sam, the woman is obsessed. She spent 2 hours on a conference call yesterday reviewing every interaction the HOA has had with you for the past 8 years. She's looking for anything she can use. Let her look. I haven't done anything wrong. You've driven on the path hundreds of times. She's calculating that as hundreds of separate violations, each potentially subject to a fine. My stomach dropped. That's insane. I had permission. Verbal permission from a previous board. She's arguing it doesn't count. David told me to get all the HOA documents. I need to understand what she can actually enforce. I can help with that. I'll bring you my copies tonight. Robert showed up at 7 with a banker's box full of documents, CC&Rs, bylaws, architectural guidelines, violation procedures, everything. This is 8 years of HOA governance. Most of it's standard, but pay attention to the sections on violations and fines. Sharon's been studying these like legal textbooks. I spent the next 3 days reading every document. What I found was concerning. The HOA had broad powers to fine members for violations, with fines starting at $50 and escalating to $500 for repeated violations. Unauthorized use of common property was indeed listed as a violation. The path was technically classified as common property. But there was something else. The documents required the board to act consistently and fairly. They couldn't selectively enforce rules, and any fines over $500 required a majority board vote and a formal hearing where the accused member could present a defense. I called David. I found something. The CC and Articus require consistent enforcement. If they're going to fine me for using the path, they need to fine everyone who's ever used it. Who else has used it? The lawn maintenance company drives on it every week. The community has a landscaping contract with Green Meadows. I've seen their trucks on that path hundreds of times. Can you prove it? I can do better than prove it. I can document it. They come every Tuesday. I'll take photos next week. Do it. And Sam, start documenting everything. Every interaction with Sharon, every HOA communication, everything. If this goes legal, documentation is everything. Thursday night, the closed board session happened. I wasn't invited, but Pete gave me the rundown afterward. It was bad, Sam. Sharon presented what she called a comprehensive review of your violations. She had photos, dates, everything. She's claiming you've violated HOA rules 368 times over the past 2 years. 368. Every time you drove on the path. She's charging each trip as a separate violation. At what fine amount? That's the thing. She's asking for the board to approve a cumulative fine of $18,400. I felt like I'd been punched. $18,000 for using a path I had permission to use. She's saying you didn't have proper permission. And she's adding fines for the mailbox flyers, for what she calls harassment of the board, and for refusal to comply with directives. How did the vote go? It didn't. Robert and I blocked it. We demanded that you be given notice and a formal hearing before any fines are assessed. Sharon was furious, but the bylaws are clear. She has to give you notice and a hearing. When? The notice is being sent certified mail tomorrow. Hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. I called David immediately. They're going after me for $18,000. On what grounds? I explained everything. He listened silently, then swore under his breath. Sam, this is harassment, clear and simple. But fighting it could be expensive and time-consuming. Let me make some calls and see what our options are. The certified notice arrived Saturday. It was 10 pages long, detailing every alleged violation with dates, times, and photos. Sharon had been documenting my path use for months, long before she'd become HOA president. This was premeditated. The notice informed me that I had the right to appear at the hearing, present evidence, and bring legal representation. The hearing would be conducted by the full HOA board, with a vote required to approve any fines. I spent the next week building my defense. I gathered emails from Marcus confirming our arrangement. I collected receipts showing my donations to the community, over $32,000 in materials and labor over 7 years. I took photos of Green Meadows trucks using the path. I documented everything. David reviewed my evidence. This is good. You've got a solid defense. But Sam, even if you win this hearing, Sharon's not going to stop. She's going to make your life miserable until you either give up or move away. I'm not moving. Then we need to think strategically. What's the end game here? I want the ban lifted so I can continue supporting the community, or I want to be left alone to live my life without harassment. The first option requires Sharon to admit she was wrong, which seems unlikely. The second requires getting her off the board or neutering her power. Also unlikely. So what do? We win this hearing decisively. Then we document every action she takes against you going forward. If she continues the harassment, we file a lawsuit for targeted harassment and abuse of power. Hit her personally and the HOA corporately. Make it expensive and painful. Won't that make me even more unpopular in the neighborhood? Probably. But you'll have legal recourse and potentially a financial settlement. Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday evening at 7 in the clubhouse. I arrived 15 minutes early with David. The main room was set up like a courtroom, with the board sitting at a long table at the front and chairs arranged in rows for observers. At least 60 people from the community were there. Sharon sat in the center of the board table, papers arranged in neat stacks in front of her. She watched me enter with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Stanton, please take a seat in the front row. The hearing will begin promptly at 7. David and I sat. He placed his briefcase on the floor and pulled out a legal pad. At exactly 7, Sharon called the hearing to order. This hearing is being conducted pursuant to Section 7.3 of the Riverside Hills HOA governing documents. We are here to address multiple alleged violations by community member Samuel Stanton. Mr. Stanton has been notified of the charges and given opportunity to respond. This board will hear evidence, allow Mr. Stanton to present his defense, and then vote on appropriate actions. All proceedings are being recorded. She gestured to a video camera on a tripod. The charges against Mr. Stanton are as follows: 368 counts of unauthorized use of common property, specifically the shared maintenance path. 14 counts of unauthorized commercial activity on HOA property. 1 count of distribution of unauthorized materials via community mailboxes. And 3 counts of harassment of HOA board members. The recommended cumulative fine is $18,400, with ongoing fines of $100 per day until compliance is achieved. Murmurs went through the crowd. The board will now present evidence supporting these charges. For the next 45 minutes, Sharon methodically presented her case. Photos of my truck on the path, dated and time-stamped. Copies of complaints from residents about noise and disruption. Calculations of alleged damage to the path's gravel surface. Copies of my flyers with highlighted sections she claimed were defamatory. It was thorough and damning if you didn't know the context. When she finished, she looked at me. "Mr. Stanton, you now have opportunity to present your defense." David stood. "Thank you, Madam President." "I'm David Klein, representing Mr. Stanton. We'd like to start by entering into evidence several documents that provide context for Mr. Stanton's use of the maintenance path." He handed copies to each board member and distributed more to the crowd. "These are email exchanges between Mr. Stanton and former HOA President Marcus Chen, dating back 8 years. As you can see, Mr. Chen explicitly granted Mr. Stanton permission to use the maintenance path for the purpose of delivering supplies to the clubhouse. This was part of a negotiated agreement where Mr. Stanton would donate materials and labor to community projects." Sharon interrupted. "These emails are not formal contracts. They don't constitute binding authorization. Actually, under Colorado law, they do. Emails can constitute valid contracts if they demonstrate offer, acceptance, and consideration. These emails clearly show all 3 elements. Mr. Chen offered path access in exchange for donated materials and labor. Mr. Stanton accepted and performed. For 8 years, this arrangement benefited the community." David pulled out another document. "This is a summary of Mr. Stanton's contributions to Riverside Hills over the past 7 years. Materials and labor totaling $32,400. That's $32,000 this community didn't have to pay for improvements and projects. In exchange, Mr. Stanton used a gravel path designed for vehicle traffic." He showed photos. "These are images of the path taken last week. As you can see, it's in excellent condition. There's no significant damage. The gravel is compacted and level. This is a maintenance path built to handle vehicle traffic, and it's being used exactly as designed." He pulled out more photos. These images show Green Meadows landscaping vehicles using the same path. They've been the community's contracted lawn service for 5 years. Their trucks are larger than Mr. Stanton's. They use the path every single week, yet there are no charges against Green Meadows. This demonstrates selective and discriminatory enforcement. Sharon's face tightened. David continued. "Regarding the commercial activity charges, Mr. Stanton's use of the path was explicitly for community benefit, not personal profit. He was delivering donated materials to HOA property. That's not commercial activity, that's charitable contribution." The mailbox violation. Mr. Stanton acknowledges he placed flyers in mailboxes. He did so to correct false and misleading information distributed by HOA leadership. The flyers contained only factual information, as we're prepared to prove. The $250 fine is arguably reasonable, and Mr. Stanton is willing to pay it. Finally, the harassment charges. Mr. Stanton has communicated with the board professionally and factually. Disagreeing with board actions is not harassment. Defending yourself against false accusations is not harassment. If anything, Mr. Stanton is the victim of harassment through this hearing, which appears designed to punish him for exercising his rights. David sat down. Sharon cleared her throat. Thank you, Mr. Klein. The board will now discuss and vote. Actually, Robert Kim spoke up, I'd like to ask Mr. Stanton some questions. Sharon looked annoyed but nodded. Robert looked at me. Sam, if the board were to restore your path access, would you be willing to resume your support of community projects? Absolutely. And would you be willing to sign a formal written agreement defining the terms? Yes, I'd prefer that. It would protect everyone. Have you ever caused intentional damage to HOA property? Never. Have you ever profited financially from your arrangement with the HOA? No. I've donated everything at cost or below. Robert nodded and sat back. Jennifer Moss raised her hand. I have a question for Sharon. Why are we fining Sam for using the path but not Green Meadows? They use it every week. Sharon's jaw tightened. Green Meadows has a formal contract with the HOA. So did Sam, just not in the format you prefer. Seems like selective enforcement to me. Another board member, Patricia Holmes, spoke. I'm uncomfortable with the amount of these fines. $18,000 seems punitive, not corrective. What's the actual goal here? Sharon shuffled her papers. The goal is ensuring compliance with community rules and deterring future violations. But if we restore his path access with a written agreement, there won't be future violations, Patricia said. This seems like we're punishing Sam for a disagreement over documentation, not actual harm to the community. The harm is to our standards and our authority, Sharon snapped. If we allow members to ignore board directives, we have no authority at all. But the board directives were unreasonable, Pete Rodriguez said. Sam physically can't deliver supplies without path access. We created an impossible situation, and now we're fining him for the consequences. Sharon stood abruptly. I call for a vote. All in favor of imposing the full fines as outlined. Only one hand went up besides Sharon's. Everyone else sat still. All opposed. 5 hands rose. Sharon's face went red. This board is making a serious mistake. We're setting a precedent that members can challenge our authority without consequences. Or, Robert said calmly, we're setting a precedent that the board acts reasonably and fairly. I move that we dismiss all charges against Sam except the mailbox violation, which he's agreed to pay. Furthermore, I move that we restore his path access with the condition that we draft a formal written agreement within 30 days defining terms and conditions. Second, said Jennifer. All in favor. 5 hands. Motion passes. Sam, you're free to use the path again. Let's work together on getting that agreement in writing. This hearing is adjourned. The room erupted in conversation. People came up to shake my hand or pat my back. A few shot disapproving looks at Sharon, who was gathering her papers with tight, jerky movements. I approached her. Sharon, I don't want this to be adversarial. I just want to continue helping the community. She looked at me with cold eyes. This isn't over, Mr. Stanton. She walked out. David leaned close. Document that threat. She's not done with you. He was right. Over the next month, I received 7 violation notices from the HOA. My mailbox was measured and found to be 1 inch too far from the curb. My lawn was cited for having grass clippings visible after mowing. My trash cans were photographed 17 minutes after the allowed collection time. My house numbers were too faded. My garden hose was visible from the street. My car was parked facing the wrong direction in my own driveway. Each violation came with a $50 fine. David sent a letter to the HOA documenting the pattern of harassment and demanding it cease. The violations stopped, but Sharon's hostility didn't. The written agreement for path access took 6 weeks to finalize because Sharon kept adding unreasonable conditions. She wanted me to provide $2 million in liability insurance. She wanted me to pay for monthly path inspections. She wanted me to limit deliveries to specific time windows that would have made it impossible to serve my regular customers. Finally, Robert and Jennifer overrode her and approved a simple, reasonable agreement. I could use the path for deliveries to the Clubhouse and community project sites. I would maintain general liability insurance, which I already had. I would make reasonable efforts to avoid peak traffic times. That was it. I signed it in May, and things returned to normal for a while. I delivered materials for the spring planting event, which had been rescheduled to late May. I provided lumber for a new playground project. I hauled stone for a memorial garden. The community seemed happy, and most people went out of their way to thank me. But Sharon was watching, always watching. In June, the HOA scheduled a vote for board positions. Sharon's term wasn't up, but 3 other seats were open. She campaigned hard for candidates who supported her vision of strict rule enforcement. She sent emails warning about the dangers of lax standards. She held coffee meetings where she talked about property values declining because of minor violations. The community, fed up with her enforcement obsession, voted in 3 new members who ran on platforms of reasonableness and community focus. The board was now 4-3 against Sharon. At the first meeting with the new board composition, Robert called for a vote on HOA priorities for the next year. The board voted to focus on community events and infrastructure maintenance rather than violation enforcement. They voted to revise the fine structure to emphasize warnings and education over punishment. And they voted to require unanimous board approval for any fine over $500. Sharon fought every vote, but she lost every time. After the meeting, she approached me in the parking lot. "You did this. You turned the community against me. Sharon, I've barely been involved in HOA politics. People just want a reasonable board that doesn't measure mailbox positions with rulers. Everything I've done has been to maintain property values and community standards. But people like you don't care about that. You just want to do whatever you want without accountability. I want to live in my house and help my community without being harassed. That's it. This community is going to decline now. When property values drop and standards disappear, remember that you contributed to it." She got in her BMW and drove away. Over the summer, something interesting happened. Without Sharon's constant enforcement pressure, the community actually became more pleasant. People were friendlier. There were more community events. Volunteers stepped up for projects because they weren't afraid of being cited for minor violations. The new board established what they called relationship-based governance. Instead of leading with fines and threats, they talked to people about issues. If someone's lawn was looking rough, they'd ask if everything was okay, offer to help. Often there was a good reason: someone was sick, dealing with a family emergency, working extra hours. The community didn't fall apart. If anything, it got stronger. Sharon remained on the board but became increasingly isolated. She'd propose strict new rules and they'd be voted down. She'd suggest fining someone and the board would choose a conversation instead. By August, she'd stopped attending most committee meetings. Then, in September, something happened that changed everything. I was delivering mulch to the community garden on a Tuesday afternoon. I took my usual route down the maintenance path, drove carefully around the curve by the Hendersons' property, and approached the garden area. That's when I saw Sharon's BMW parked directly in the middle of the path, blocking it completely. I stopped my truck and got out. Sharon was standing next to her car, arms crossed. The path is closed for maintenance today. I didn't get any notice about maintenance. The board approved emergency maintenance this morning. You'll need to use an alternate route. There is no alternate route. That's the whole point of the path. That's not my problem. I pulled out my phone and called Robert. He answered on the second ring. Hey Sam, what's up? Did the board approve emergency path maintenance today? What? No, there's no maintenance scheduled. Can you tell that to Sharon? She's blocking the path with her car. I heard him sigh. Put me on speaker. I did. You're on speaker, Robert. Sharon, what are you doing? There's no maintenance scheduled. Her voice was icy. I'm exercising my authority as a board member to temporarily close common property that I believe poses a safety hazard. What safety hazard? The path surface is degraded. It needs immediate assessment before further vehicle traffic is allowed. Sharon, the path is fine. We had it inspected last month. Move your car. I'm calling an emergency board meeting to discuss the path safety issue. Until then, it's closed. Sharon, move your car now or I'm calling a tow truck. You wouldn't dare. Try me. Sam has a legal right to use that path. You're interfering with a valid agreement. Move your car in the next 5 minutes or I'm calling Mountain View Towing. Silence. Then Sharon got in her car, started it, and drove forward about 10 feet before stopping again. There, path is open, but this will be addressed at the next board meeting. She drove away. I delivered the mulch, but the incident rattled me. Sharon was escalating again. At the next board meeting, Sharon presented a proposal to require all path users to complete a training and certification program before being granted access. The cost would be $300 per year. The training would cover proper path use, maintenance awareness, and community property respect. This is specifically targeting Sam, Jennifer said flatly. He's the only regular path user besides our contracted services. It's a safety measure that applies to everyone equally, Sharon countered. It's harassment, Robert said. Motion to table this proposal indefinitely. Second. The vote was 6-1 with Sharon as the only support. After the meeting, Robert pulled me aside. Sam, I need to tell you something. Sharon's been talking to a lawyer. I think she's planning to sue you personally. For what? I don't know exactly. Something about tortious interference with HOA governance. It's probably groundless, but it could be expensive to defend. Why is she so obsessed with me, honestly? I think you represent everything she can't control. You had a relationship with Marcus that worked fine without her involvement. You have support from the community, and you successfully challenged her authority. For someone like Sharon, that's intolerable. What should I do? Document everything. Keep David on retainer, and watch your back. 2 weeks later, I was served with a lawsuit. Sharon Sutherland, personally, was suing me for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with her duties as HOA president. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. David read through the complaint and shook his head. This is garbage, absolute garbage, but garbage lawsuits still require time and money to defend. Can we get it dismissed? Probably, but not immediately. We'll need to file a response, go through discovery, maybe get to summary judgment. You're looking at 6 months and probably $15,000 in legal fees unless she's willing to settle. I'm not settling. I haven't done anything wrong. Then we fight. But Sam, this is going to get ugly. He was right again. Sharon's lawyer sent discovery requests demanding every email, text message, and document I had related to the HOA for the past 8 years. They took my deposition, where Sharon's lawyer asked hostile questions for 6 hours. They subpoenaed my business records trying to prove I'd profited from the HOA relationship. David fought back hard. He filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Sharon's claims were meritless and appeared designed to harass me for exercising my legal rights. He requested sanctions for the frivolous lawsuit. He deposed Sharon, who spent 4 hours insisting she was the victim of my coordinated campaign to undermine her authority. In January, 7 months after the hearing, we finally got a court date for the motion to dismiss. Judge Margaret Foster presided. She was in her early 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. Sharon's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Drummond, argued that my flyers had damaged Sharon's reputation in the community and caused her severe emotional distress. She claimed I had intentionally sabotaged Sharon's ability to govern effectively. Judge Foster listened impassively, then turned to David. "Mr. Klein, Your Honor, this case is about a HOA dispute that got out of hand. Mr. Stanton distributed factually accurate information to correct false statements. That's protected speech, not defamation. Miss Sutherland's emotional distress claims are similarly without merit. Being disagreed with or having your decisions criticized is not intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's part of being in a leadership position. And the tortious interference claim, Your Honor, you can't tortiously interfere with your own rights. Mr. Stanton is a community member. He has every right to communicate with other members and to participate in HOA governance. Miss Sutherland is essentially arguing that disagreeing with her is tortious interference. That's not a valid legal theory." Judge Foster nodded slowly. "Miss Drummond, I've reviewed the complaint and the supporting evidence. I'm struggling to see how Mr. Stanton's actions constitute anything other than a good faith dispute over HOA policies. The flyers appear to be factual. Where's the defamation?" Patricia Drummond stood. "Your Honor, the overall tone and context of the flyers damaged my client's reputation. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Are you arguing that the flyers contained false statements? Not precisely false, but misleading in their framing. That's not defamation. What about the emotional distress claim? What evidence do you have that Mr. Stanton's actions were extreme and outrageous? My client has suffered significant stress and anxiety as a direct result of Mr. Stanton's actions." Miss Drummond, being stressed because people disagreed with your decisions doesn't meet the legal standard for intentional infliction of emotional distress. That tort requires conduct so extreme and outrageous that it exceeds all bounds of decency. A community member distributing factual information doesn't come close to that standard. Judge Foster looked at her notes. "I'm granting the motion to dismiss with prejudice. All claims are dismissed. Furthermore, I'm awarding Mr. Stanton attorney's fees and costs." This lawsuit appears to have been filed to punish Mr. Stanton for exercising his legal rights, and that's not an appropriate use of the court system. My clerk will coordinate on the fee amount. She banged her gavel. Sharon's face went white. She stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom. Outside, David shook my hand. "That's about as decisive a win as you can get, and the fee award is significant. She's going to owe you $15,000, maybe $20,000. Will she pay? She'll have to, or we'll go after her assets. But Sam, be careful. People who lose like this sometimes do unpredictable things." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. 2 days later, I came home to find my mailbox destroyed. Not just knocked over, but smashed to pieces with what looked like a sledgehammer. The post was cracked, the box was crumpled, and my mail was scattered across the lawn. I called the police. Officer Jennifer Martinez came out and took a report. "Any idea who might have done this?" I have suspicions, but no proof. HOA dispute. How'd you know? She smiled slightly. We get a lot of calls from Riverside Hills. Someone really doesn't like you. The former HOA president. We've been in a legal dispute. She lost badly in court 2 days ago. And you think she retaliated by smashing your mailbox? It seems likely, but again, no proof. I'll file the report. If you can get security camera footage from neighbors, that would help. Destroying a mailbox is a federal offense, actually. It's considered tampering with mail. Really? Yeah. Mailboxes are federal property in a sense. We could bring federal charges if we can prove who did it. I canvassed my neighbors. 3 houses down, the Chens had a security camera that faced the street. They let me review the footage. There, at 2:30 in the morning, was Sharon's silver BMW. It pulled up to my house, parked, and Sharon got out wearing dark clothes. She pulled a sledgehammer from her trunk, walked to my mailbox, and proceeded to destroy it with a dozen heavy swings. Then she got back in her car and drove away. The video was crystal clear, including her license plate. I called Officer Martinez back. I have video evidence. She came back out, watched the footage, and her eyebrows rose. Well, that's about as clear as it gets. I'm going to need a copy of this. We'll be pressing charges. Both local and federal. I'll coordinate with the postal inspector's office. Miss Sutherland is looking at potential federal charges for mailbox destruction and possible state charges for criminal mischief and vandalism. What's the likely outcome? If convicted, probably fines and probation for a first offense, but it'll be on her record. 3 days later, police showed up at Sharon's house and arrested her. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with speculation and gossip. By evening, everyone knew what had happened. Sharon made bail and immediately called for an emergency HOA board meeting. She wanted to address what she called false charges being brought by a vendetta-driven neighbor. The board declined to hold the meeting. Robert sent out an email to the community explaining that board members were prohibited from using their positions to address personal legal matters, and that Sharon's arrest was a personal issue separate from HOA governance. Sharon responded with her own email claiming she was being persecuted for trying to maintain community standards. The board responded by calling for a special election to recall Sharon from her position. Under the HOA bylaws, any board member could be removed by a vote of community members if a petition with signatures from 30% of households was submitted. The petition got the required signatures in 4 days. The recall election was scheduled for March. Sharon campaigned desperately, going door to door, sending emails, posting on social media. She framed herself as a victim of political persecution, a dedicated volunteer being destroyed by someone who wanted to avoid accountability. It didn't work. The recall vote was 73% in favor of removal. Sharon was off the board. A week later, she pleaded no contest to the mailbox destruction charges. She was sentenced to 1-year probation, 200 hours of community service, a $5,000 fine, and restitution to me for the mailbox and cleanup costs. She was also ordered to have no contact with me except through lawyers. At the sentencing hearing, the judge, a different one from my civil case, addressed Sharon directly. Miss Sutherland, this court takes seriously the destruction of federal property and acts of retaliation. You were given authority in your community, and instead of using it responsibly, you engaged in a pattern of harassment culminating in criminal activity. The sentence I'm imposing today is lenient compared to what federal charges could have brought. I strongly suggest you reflect on your behavior and make better choices going forward. Sharon stood silently, then left the courtroom without looking at anyone. That was 8 months ago. Sharon still lives in Riverside Hills, but she keeps to herself. She doesn't come to community events. She doesn't serve on committees. She sold the BMW and drives a modest sedan now. I see her occasionally at the grocery store or driving through the neighborhood, and we don't acknowledge each other. The HOA elected a new board that includes Robert as president. They formalized the relationship-based governance approach and revised the community guidelines to emphasize common sense over rigid enforcement. They established a community fund to support members going through hardships, and they've organized more events than we had in the previous 5 years combined. My agreement for path access was extended indefinitely, with unanimous board approval. I continue to donate materials and labor to community projects, though now we have written agreements for everything, which honestly makes things clearer for everyone. Last month, we completed a major renovation of the clubhouse using mostly donated materials from my suppliers. The community threw a huge party to celebrate, with over 200 people attending. Kids ran around playing games, families ate together at picnic tables, and people kept thanking me for my contributions. Robert pulled me aside at one point. "You know, if Sharon had just been reasonable from the start, none of that mess would have happened. All she had to do was recognize that your arrangement was benefiting everyone." "Some people can't stand not being in control," I said. "True. But I think there's a lesson here about leadership. Real leadership isn't about enforcing rules and punishing violations. It's about bringing people together and finding solutions that work for everyone." The community certainly seems happier now. We are. Property values are actually up too, ironically. Turns out people want to live in friendly neighborhoods where they're not afraid of getting fined for parking their car 6 inches over their driveway line. I laughed. Who would have thought? As I drove home that evening, taking my usual route down the well-maintained path, I thought about everything that had happened. The conflict, the stress, the legal battles, all of it could have been avoided with a little flexibility and goodwill. But I'd also learned something important. Communities thrive when people focus on cooperation rather than control, when leaders serve rather than dominate, when disagreements are handled with conversation rather than punishment. The tire tracks on that gravel path had become a symbol of something much bigger. Sharon saw them as evidence of disrespect and violation. The rest of the community saw them as evidence of contribution and partnership. In the end, the community chose partnership. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Moss. The board had just approved funding for a new community greenhouse, and they wanted to know if I could help with materials. I texted back that I'd be happy to put together a proposal. As I pulled into my driveway, past my new mailbox that I'd installed myself with a reinforced post, I felt genuinely grateful. Grateful for neighbors who'd supported me, grateful for a reasonable board, grateful that the nightmare with Sharon was over. The house lights were on, warm and welcoming. I grabbed my phone and went inside, already thinking about designs for the greenhouse project. Sometimes the hardest fights are the ones you never wanted, fought over principles you wish didn't need defending. But when you come out the other side, you appreciate the peace even more. The tire tracks were still on the path, evidence of hundreds of deliveries made to help build something better. They'd probably always be there, a reminder of both conflict and contribution, and that seemed exactly right. The community had chosen to see those tracks as marks of partnership rather than violation, as evidence of someone giving back rather than taking advantage. That choice made all the difference. I settled into my chair and opened my laptop to start working on the greenhouse proposal. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. Somewhere a few streets over, Sharon was in her house, probably still bitter about everything that had happened. I felt sorry for her, honestly. She'd had the opportunity to lead a wonderful community, and she'd chosen control over collaboration. She'd made an enemy out of someone who wanted to be an ally. And in the end, she'd lost everything she'd been trying to protect. The greenhouse project would be good for the community. We'd grow vegetables to donate to the local food bank, teach kids about sustainable gardening, create another space for people to gather and connect. And I'd use the maintenance path to deliver the materials, driving carefully over the gravel, leaving tracks that would quickly disappear but mark the progress we were making together. That's what communities are supposed to be about. Not perfect lawns and precisely measured mailboxes. Not rules enforced without regard for context or compassion. But people working together, contributing what they can, building something bigger than themselves. Sharon never understood that. Maybe she never would, but the rest of us did, and that was enough. I finished the greenhouse proposal around midnight, sent it to Robert, and headed to bed. Tomorrow, I had deliveries for paying customers, but next week I'd start gathering materials for the greenhouse. There would be more tire tracks on that path, and that was perfectly fine with everyone who mattered.